Arabic translator quits and millionaire loses 3. 9B in a contract until the janitor's 6-year-old daughter reveals a truth that leaves him paralyzed. Before we unfold this sorrowful story of isolation and grief, comment your location and subscribe for more emotional journeys. The mahogany doors of Hartwell Industries' boardroom burst open with such force they slammed against the marble walls, creating a thunderous echo that reverberated through Manhattan's most exclusive business tower. Richard Hartwell, 42, felt his stomach plummet as he watched his lead Arabic translator, Hassan al-Mahmoud, storm toward the conference table where 12 Saudi investors sat rigid with confusion and growing irritation. "I refuse to work under these conditions anymore." Hassan's voice boomed through the room as he slammed his leather portfolio onto the polished surface with enough force to make the crystal water glasses jump. "Find yourself another translator, Mr. Hartwell. I'm done with your impossible demands, your constant second-guessing, and your complete lack of respect for my professional expertise." And Richard's jaw clenched so hard he could hear his teeth grinding as he watched 3 years of delicate negotiations crumble before his eyes like sand through his fingers. The Al Rashid Group representatives exchanged worried glances, their traditional white thobes a stark contrast against the modern glass and steel of Manhattan's skyline stretching endlessly behind them. This wasn't just any business deal. This was the renewable energy contract that would either save his crumbling empire or destroy everything he'd painstakingly built since his devastating divorce 5 years ago. The divorce had cost him half his assets, his beloved Connecticut mansion, and worst of all, the respect of his teenage son Marcus, who'd chosen to live with his mother in California. Since then, Richard had thrown himself into work with the desperate intensity of a drowning man, alienating employees and partners alike with his obsessive need to control every detail. "Hassan, please reconsider." Richard's voice remained controlled despite his racing heart and the cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. "We're 48 hours away from signing the largest renewable energy contract in Middle Eastern history. $9 billion depends on this translation. Think about what this means, not just for my company, but for sustainable energy development across 6 countries. But Hassan was already at the door, his weathered face set with the determination of a man who'd finally reached his breaking point. "You should have thought about that before questioning every single word I spoke, demanding I repeat myself 3 times for every technical term, and treating me like an incompetent amateur instead of someone with 30 years of experience in international negotiations." The door slammed shut with a finality that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room, leaving an uncomfortable silence that pressed down on everyone present like a heavy blanket. Richard could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears as the full weight of catastrophe settled on his shoulders. The eldest Saudi investor, Abdullah al-Rashid, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver threading through his carefully groomed beard, spoke rapidly in Arabic to his colleagues. Richard watched helplessly as their expressions grew increasingly concerned, their voices rising with what sounded unmistakably like frustration and disappointment. Without Hassan, he was completely cut off from the most important business negotiation of his life, reduced to a silent observer in his own boardroom. Richard's assistant, Jennifer Morrison, appeared at his side with panic clearly written across her usually composed features. Her normally perfect blonde hair was disheveled from running her fingers through it, and her voice trembled as she whispered urgently in his ear. "Sir, what do we do? The contract signing is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. I've already called every translation service in the city. They're either unavailable on such short notice or don't have anyone with the specific technical expertise needed for renewable energy contracts." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of the Hudson River, Richard could see the cleaning crew beginning their evening rounds on the floor below. Among them, he noticed Maria Gonzalez, the night janitor who'd worked quietly and efficiently in the building for 6 years. She moved with practiced precision between offices, her small frame dwarfed by the industrial cleaning cart, and trailing behind her was her young daughter, a tiny girl who couldn't be more than 6 years old, with wild, dark curls bouncing as she skipped alongside her mother's cart, completely oblivious to the corporate drama unfolding 42 floors above. "We're finished," Richard whispered hoarsely, running both hands through his greying hair until it stood at odd angles. The Al-Rashid group was already gathering their important documents, disappointment evident in every movement as they prepared to abandon 3 years of careful planning. 3 years of countless transatlantic flights to Riyadh, millions of dollars in development costs, environmental impact studies, and regulatory approvals, all about to vanish into thin air because of one man's wounded pride and Richard's own inability to trust the people he hired to help him succeed. 6-year-old Sofia Gonzalez pressed her small nose against the cool glass of the elevator as it climbed steadily toward the 42nd floor, watching the city lights blur past like falling stars. Her mother, Maria, adjusted her cleaning supplies with the weary efficiency of someone who'd perfected the same routine for countless nights, sighing deeply as she mentally prepared for another long evening shift. It had been another exhausting day that started at 5 a.m. at the luxury hotel downtown, where Maria worked as a housekeeper, cleaning rooms and changing linens for wealthy guests who left tips smaller than what they spent on a single cup of coffee. The double shift was necessary. The hotel job paid the rent on their tiny studio apartment in Queens, while the evening cleaning position at Hartwell Industries covered groceries, Sophia's school supplies, and the ever-growing pile of medical bills left over from Ahmed's cancer treatment. "Mija, remember what I told you about staying quiet while Mommy works?" Maria said softly in Spanish, her voice carrying the accumulated fatigue of someone juggling 2 demanding jobs while raising a child alone. Then, almost without thinking, she switched to Arabic, the language her late husband Ahmed had taught her during their brief but passionate marriage in Morocco 7 years ago, back when the world had seemed full of possibility instead of endless struggle. Sophia nodded solemnly, understanding every word in both languages with the natural ease that only children possess. Her father had been gone for 2 years now, taken by the aggressive cancer that had ravaged his body, despite the treatments that had drained their savings. But his gift of language lived on in his daughter's quick mind and eager heart. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime to reveal chaos in the executive wing of Hartwell Industries. Sophia's dark eyes widened as she took in the scene, men in pristine white robes gesturing frantically with obvious distress, while a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit paced back and forth like a caged animal, his face flushed red with what looked like a mixture of anger and desperation. The voices mixed together in a cacophony of languages, rapid Arabic, frustrated English, and something that sounded like barely controlled panic in every tongue. Sophia had heard these tones before in the hospital waiting rooms, where she'd spent so many hours during her father's illness, the sound adults made when something very important was going terribly wrong. Maria quickly pushed her cart toward the far end of the hallway, her head down and shoulders hunched as she tried to avoid the commotion. She'd learned over 6 years of night shift work that the best way to keep her job was to remain invisible, to clean efficiently around whatever dramas the wealthy executives brought to their glass towers. But Sophia's naturally curious nature, inherited from her father who had loved to solve puzzles and mysteries, got the better of her careful upbringing. She'd heard that angry voice before. It belonged to the tall man who sometimes yelled at her mother when the offices weren't cleaned to his exacting standards. The same voice that had once made her mother cry quietly in the supply closet while Sophia pretended to be asleep in the corner. "They're saying they want to leave because no one can talk to them properly," Sophia whispered to her mother in Arabic, having easily followed the Saudi men's increasingly frustrated conversation. Her small voice was filled with the unconscious confidence of someone who'd grown up switching between languages as naturally as breathing. Maria's tired eyes widened in genuine surprise as she realized the full extent of her daughter's linguistic abilities. Even after 6 years of marriage to Ahmed, her own grasp of Arabic had remained limited to basic household conversations, simple expressions of love, and the prayers Ahmed had taught her. But Sophia had absorbed her father's native language like a tiny sponge, soaking up not just words, but the cultural nuances and formal business terminology that Ahmed had used in his work for an international import company in Casablanca. Through the glass doors of the boardroom, they could see Richard Hartwell sitting with his head buried in his hands, like a man watching his world collapse, while the Saudi investors continued their heated discussion with increasing urgency. His assistant was frantically making phone call after phone call, desperation evident in every gesture, as she tried to locate a qualified translator willing to work on such impossibly short notice. Sophia tugged gently at her mother's worn uniform sleeve, her expression serious beyond her years. "Mama, the nice man looks very sad, like you did when the hospital people said Papa couldn't come home anymore. The men in white clothes are saying they have to go back to their country tomorrow because no one here can help them understand the important papers about building things that make electricity from the sun and wind." 03. Richard's phone had been ringing non-stop for 45 minutes, each call ending with the same devastating result. Every translation service in New York City was either booked solid for the next 2 weeks, couldn't provide someone with the specific technical expertise needed for complex renewable energy contracts, or was demanding fees so astronomical that even Richard's desperate situation couldn't justify the expense. His hands shook slightly as he scrolled through his contacts, calling in favors from business associates, university professors, even the cultural attaché at the United Nations. Nothing. It was as if the entire Arabic-speaking population of Manhattan had simultaneously vanished into thin air, leaving him stranded on the precipice of financial ruin. "Mr. Hartwell?" Abdullah al-Rashid spoke in heavily accented English, his dignified voice carrying the weight of disappointment and cultural frustration. "We have great respect for your company and your vision for sustainable energy development in our region. But without proper, accurate communication, we cannot proceed with confidence. Our board of directors in Riyadh expects detailed understanding of every clause, every technical specification, every legal implication of this partnership." Richard nodded grimly, feeling the familiar knot of panic tightening in his chest as he watched $9 billion and his company's salvation slowly slipping away like water through his fingers. The bitter irony wasn't lost on him. He'd built his entire fortune by obsessing over details, by demanding perfection from every employee and contractor, yet his own overbearing attitude and lack of trust had driven away the one person who could save everything he'd worked for. The Saudi delegation had been remarkably patient, far more gracious than he deserved considering the circumstances. They'd flown halfway around the world specifically for this signing, had cleared their schedules and prepared their own technical teams for implementation. Now they were preparing to return to Riyadh empty-handed, taking with them not just the contract, but the reputation damage that would follow Richard's company throughout the Middle Eastern business community. Outside the boardroom, Sophia watched the adult chaos unfold with the peculiar clarity that children often bring to complicated situations. She observed her mother methodically emptying wastebaskets and wiping down surfaces with mechanical precision, but Sophia could easily see the worry lines creasing Maria's forehead, the way her shoulders remained tense, even during routine tasks. They needed this job desperately, especially with Sophia starting first grade next month and all the associated expenses that would bring: new clothes, school supplies, the after-school program that would allow Maria to keep both her jobs. The studio apartment rent had already increased twice this year, and the medical bills from Ahmed's treatment continued arriving sporadically, like painful reminders of everything they'd lost. "Mama," Sophia whispered urgently, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "What if I could help the sad man and the men in white clothes talk to each other properly? I understand everything they're saying, and I know all the words Papa taught me about business and building things." Maria nearly dropped the heavy trash bag she was holding, her face immediately flushing with a mixture of pride and terror. "Mija, what are you saying? These are very important business people discussing things worth more money than we could ever imagine. Children don't belong in their meetings, especially not little girls whose mothers clean their offices." But Sophia had already made up her mind with the decisive determination that had characterized her personality since she was old enough to walk. She'd been watching her mother clean these pristine offices for 2 years now, ever since the daycare center had started allowing children to accompany parents on evening shifts as a cost-saving measure for struggling families. She'd seen how hard her mother worked, scrubbing and polishing until her hands were raw, how tired she looked after splitting 16-hour days between 2 physically demanding jobs. Sophia had also noticed how the important men in expensive suits barely acknowledged her mother's existence, treating her like part of the furniture rather than a human being deserving of basic courtesy and respect. The men in white clothes are saying the contract is very good and fair, but they need someone to explain the difficult words about solar panels and wind machines and how the American laws work differently from their country's laws, Sophia said with quiet confidence, her dark eyes bright with intelligence. "Papa Ahmed taught me all about business words when he worked at the import company in Morocco. Remember? He used to practice his presentations with me and said I was the smartest little translator he'd ever met." 4. At exactly 8:47 p.m., Richard Hartwell's world shifted on its axis in a way that would forever divide his life into before and after. He was staring at his phone screen, mentally calculating the catastrophic financial implications of this failed deal. The layoffs he'd have to authorize, the expansion projects that would be cancelled, the investors who would abandon ship, when a small, clear voice cut through his spiral of despair like a beam of sunlight through storm clouds. "Excuse me, sir. I think I can help you talk to those men who are upset." Richard looked up from his phone to see quite possibly the most unexpected sight in the history of Hartwell Industries boardroom meetings. Sofia Gonzalez stood barely 3 feet tall in the doorway, her wild, dark curls framing a face so serious and determined it seemed almost incongruous with her bright pink Frozen-themed t-shirt, denim overalls, and light-up sneakers that blinked with each step. Behind her, Maria hovered in the hallway like a deer caught in headlights, clearly mortified by her daughter's unprecedented boldness. Her cleaning cart remained abandoned by the elevator as she wrung her hands nervously, torn between grabbing Sophia and running away, and the growing realization that her 6-year-old daughter had just interrupted a meeting involving more money than their family would see in several lifetimes. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hartwell," Maria began in heavily accented English, her voice shaking with embarrassment as she reached desperately for Sophia's small hand. "She didn't mean to interrupt your very important meeting with these distinguished gentlemen. Come quickly, Mija. We need to finish our work and go home before we cause any more trouble." But Sophia stood her ground with the unwavering confidence of someone who'd inherited her father's diplomatic instincts and her mother's stubborn determination. She looked directly at Richard with those impossibly mature brown eyes and spoke with a clarity that cut straight to the heart of his problem. "The men in white clothes aren't really angry at you, Mr. Hartwell. They're frustrated and worried because they think you don't trust them enough to have honest conversations." The man with the beard who was translating before, he left because he was tired of you asking him to explain the same things over and over like you thought he was lying or making mistakes on purpose. Died. The boardroom fell into absolute silence, the kind of quiet that happens when everyone present realizes they're witnessing something extraordinary. Even the Saudi investors stopped their urgent discussions to stare at this unexpected interruption, their expressions shifting from confusion to curiosity as they processed what had just happened. Richard felt a complicated mix of emotions washing over him: irritation at the interruption, embarrassment at being lectured by a child, and underneath it all, a growing sense of wonder at how this tiny person had managed to cut through hours of confusion and identify the exact problem that had been eating away at his business relationships for years. "Sweetheart," Richard said, forcing his voice to remain patient despite the chaos swirling around him. "This is a very complicated business meeting about things that adults spend many years in school learning to understand. These men and I are discussing technical specifications for solar energy systems, international law, and financial contracts worth billions of dollars. Why don't you go help your mother finish her work so you can get home to bed?" Sophia's expression didn't waver for even a second. Instead, she turned toward Abdullah al-Rashid with the poise of a seasoned diplomat and spoke in fluid, perfect Arabic that flowed like music through the tense boardroom air. "Respected sir, please don't leave yet because of this confusion. This man has worked very hard for 3 years to create something beautiful and important for your country, something that will bring clean energy to help children and families have better lives. He's not trying to be disrespectful. He's just scared of making mistakes because this project means everything to him. Just like taking care of my mother means everything to me." The reaction was immediate and absolutely dramatic. Abdullah's distinguished eyebrows shot up in amazement, and he leaned forward in his chair, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. The other Saudi investors began murmuring among themselves in rapid Arabic, their voices filled with wonder and growing interest. Abdullah responded to Sophia in Arabic, his tone gentle, but clearly testing her language abilities with increasingly complex vocabulary and cultural references. Sophia listened with the intense concentration of someone who understood that this moment would change everything, then replied with confidence that made every adult in the room question their assumptions about what children were capable of understanding. "He says they've been very impressed with your company's solar panel designs and the environmental impact studies you provided," Sophia translated, looking back at Richard with those serious brown eyes. "But they need someone who can explain how the maintenance contracts will work under American law versus Saudi Arabian law, and how the training programs for their workers will be structured. They're not trying to be difficult or demanding. They just want to make sure their people back home understand everything perfectly so no one gets confused or makes mistakes later." "05. My God," Richard whispered, his voice barely audible as the full implications of what had just happened began to sink in. "Who taught you to speak Arabic with such incredible fluency and precision? That wasn't just conversational Arabic. You were using formal business terminology that most native speakers would struggle with." Sophia seemed to consider her answer carefully, her small face growing thoughtful in a way that reminded everyone present that despite her remarkable abilities, she was still a 6-year-old child processing questions about her deceased father. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a mixture of pride and sadness that tugged at every heart in the room. "My papa, Ahmed Rashid, taught me everything," she replied with simple dignity that would have impressed the most sophisticated diplomats. "He came from Casablanca in Morocco and married my mama 7 years ago when she was working at a hotel there during her vacation. He said Arabic was the most beautiful language in the entire world, like music that could paint pictures with words, and that I should learn it perfectly so I could talk to his family and understand the poetry and stories that made his culture so special." Her voice grew softer, and Maria had to fight back tears as she watched her daughter's small shoulders straighten with the kind of pride that comes from carrying on someone's legacy. "But Papa got very sick with cancer and went to heaven when I was 4 years old. The doctors tried everything they could, but sometimes even the smartest grown-ups can't fix what's broken." Maria's eyes filled with tears as she remembered those final months when Ahmed, weak from chemotherapy but determined to leave his daughter with gifts that couldn't be taken away, had spent every moment of his remaining strength teaching Sophia not just the language but the cultural nuances, business terminology, and diplomatic grace that had made him successful in international trade. Abdullah al-Rashid leaned forward with an expression that had transformed completely from skepticism to genuine wonder and growing respect. He began speaking directly to Sophia in rapid, formal Arabic the kind used in high-level business negotiations, testing her knowledge of technical terms, cultural protocols, and complex grammatical structures that would challenge even experienced translators. Sophia responded without hesitation, her small voice carrying the confidence and cultural awareness that her father had spent countless hours instilling in her. The exchange continued for several minutes, while Richard, Maria, and the other investors watched in amazement, witnessing a level of cross-cultural communication that most international businesses would pay thousands of dollars to achieve. Mr. Al-Rashid says I remind him of his own granddaughter back in Riyadh, who is also 7 years old and loves to learn new languages, Sophia translated when the conversation paused. But he says she's not nearly as good with business words as I am. He wants to know if you're really truly serious about the solar panel project for helping their cities become cleaner and better for children to grow up in, or if this is just about making money for yourself. Richard felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, a recognition that this tiny girl had just asked the most important question of his entire career, the question that cut through all the legal documents and financial projections to the heart of what really mattered. The boardroom remained silent as everyone waited for his response. "Tell him," Richard said slowly, kneeling down so he could look directly into Sophia's eyes at her level, "that this project means more to me than just making money. It means the chance to help create clean energy that will make the air cleaner and the world better for children like you, not just in America but all over the world. Tell him that after my own son stopped talking to me because I was always too busy with work to be a real father, I realized that the most important business we can do is building a world that children will be proud to inherit." Adim. Sophia studied his face with the intensity of someone far beyond her years, seeming to weigh not just his words, but the sincerity behind them. Her dark eyes searched his expression for any sign of deception or manipulation, using instincts her father had taught her about reading people's true intentions. Then she turned back to Abdullah and spoke in Arabic with a passion and conviction that surprised everyone in the room, her small hands gesturing expressively as she conveyed not just Richard's words, but somehow managed to translate the emotion and genuine commitment behind them. Whatever she said caused Abdullah to smile for the first time since entering the boardroom, his weathered face lighting up with an expression of satisfaction and growing trust. The next 4 hours transformed Richard Hartwell's understanding of both international business and the profound wisdom that children could bring to adult problems. Sophia had been provided with a stack of law books to boost her height at the conference table, and she translated with the precision of a seasoned professional, while occasionally asking for clarification on technical terms that would challenge most college graduates. Her questions revealed an intuitive understanding of both American business culture and Saudi Arabian social customs that impressed even Abdullah's most experienced advisors. When Richard explained the 20-year warranty structure for the solar panels, Sophia didn't just translate the words. She asked why the warranty was structured that way, and then explained to the Saudi delegation the reasoning behind American business practices in terms they could easily relate to their own commercial experiences. "They want to know about the maintenance training program for their engineers," Sophia explained, her small hands folded professionally as she spoke. "Mr. Al-Rashid is concerned because the desert sand in their region might cause different problems than the equipment faces in other countries, and he wants to make sure their people will know how to handle those special challenges." Richard found himself explaining complex technical details to a 6-year-old girl who then conveyed them to billionaire investors with perfect accuracy. But more remarkably, Sophia began offering suggestions that showed an understanding of human nature that most adults never developed. "Why don't you tell them that you'll send American engineers to Saudi Arabia to train their people for free for the first 2 years?" she suggested during a brief break, looking up at Richard with those serious dark eyes. "And maybe their engineers could come to America too, so both countries learn from each other." Papa Ahmed always said, the best business happens when everybody teaches everybody else something new. The suggestion was brilliant in its simplicity, addressing the Saudi concerns about technical support while creating the kind of cultural exchange that would strengthen the business relationship for decades. Abdullah's face lit up when Sophia presented the idea, and he immediately began discussing implementation details with his colleagues. As the evening stretched toward midnight, the framework for the largest renewable energy deal in Middle Eastern history took shape around Sophia's patient translation work. Contract terms were refined, technical specifications were clarified, and cultural concerns were addressed with a sensitivity that had been completely missing from previous negotiations. By 11:45 p.m., when Maria had finished cleaning every office on the 42nd floor twice over, the Saudi delegation was preparing to leave with smiles of satisfaction and handshakes that promised a successful signing ceremony the following morning. Abdullah al-Rashid spoke privately with Sophia in Arabic for several minutes, then asked her to translate his final words to Richard. Her small face grew serious as she listened, nodding with the gravity of someone entrusted with an important message. He says tomorrow they will definitely sign the contract because tonight they finally understood that you're not just a businessman. You're a father who wants to build something good for children everywhere. Sophia translated, yawning as exhaustion finally began to show despite her determined efforts to stay alert. But first, before the signing ceremony, he wants to meet with you alone, to discuss something very important about families and what really matters when people do business together. As Maria gathered her cleaning supplies with hands that trembled slightly from fatigue and amazement at what her daughter had accomplished, Richard watched Sophia lean against her mother's side. For the first time in hours, she looked like the tired 6-year-old she actually was, rather than the miraculous translator who'd saved his entire empire from collapse. "Mrs. Gonzalez," Richard said quietly, his voice hoarse with emotion and gratitude, "I don't have words to express what Sophia did tonight. She didn't just save a business deal. She showed me something I'd completely forgotten about what really matters in life and business. She has a gift that most adults spend decades trying to develop, if they ever manage it at all." Maria nodded graciously, her tired eyes bright with pride for her extraordinary daughter, but Richard could see the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders after a day that had started before dawn and stretched far beyond any reasonable working hours. "Sophia," Richard called softly as they reached the elevator, his heart full of emotions he couldn't quite name. "What you did tonight was absolutely extraordinary, beyond anything I've ever witnessed in 30 years of international business. You have a remarkable gift for bringing people together and helping them understand each other." Sophia looked back at him with those serious brown eyes that had somehow seen through to the heart of a $3.9 billion negotiation and found the human connection that made everything else possible. "Don't worry, Mr. Hartwell," she said with the quiet confidence of someone far beyond her years. "Everything will be okay now. Papa Ahmed used to tell me that when people tell the truth to each other with kind hearts, good things always happen, like magic, but real." The next morning arrived with the crisp promise of September in Manhattan, but Richard Hartwell barely noticed the golden sunlight streaming through his penthouse windows. He'd been awake since 4 a.m., pacing his empty apartment and replaying every moment of the previous evening, unable to shake the image of Sophia's serious brown eyes and the way she'd effortlessly bridged two worlds with nothing but honesty and courage. At exactly 8 a.m., his doorman called to announce Abdullah al-Rashid's early arrival. The Saudi businessman entered Richard's office, wearing traditional dress, but carrying himself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to billion-dollar negotiations. However, instead of discussing contract details, Abdullah's first words caught Richard completely off guard. "Mr. Hartwell, before we proceed with the signing ceremony, I must share something that your remarkable young translator revealed to me last night," Abdullah said, settling into the leather chair across from Richard's desk. She spoke about her father, Ahmed Rashid, with such love and precision that I felt compelled to research his background. Richard leaned forward, sensing the conversation was about to take an unexpected turn. I'm not sure I understand the relevance. Ahmed Rashid was my nephew, Abdullah interrupted quietly. My sister Fatima's youngest son. He moved to Morocco for university, married your cleaning lady, and we lost touch when he became ill. Last night, I watched my grandniece save your company without knowing we were family. The revelation hit Richard like a physical blow. Sophia wasn't just a gifted child who'd happened to overhear their crisis. She was Abdullah's great-niece, the granddaughter of one of the most respected families in Saudi Arabia's business community. The cosmic irony was staggering. The solution to his most desperate crisis had been cleaning his offices every night for 2 years. She doesn't know, does she? Richard asked, his voice hoarse with shock. Maria never learned Ahmed's full family background. He was protecting them from obligations he felt they couldn't fulfill, Abdullah explained. But Sophia carries royal blood, Mr. Hartwell. In our culture, she would be entitled to education, support, opportunities beyond anything her current circumstances provide. Richard's mind raced as the implications crystallized. What are you saying? I'm saying that while we sign this contract as business partners, I've discovered I have family responsibilities that extend far beyond renewable energy projects, Abdullah replied with quiet determination. That little girl deserves more than watching her mother scrub floors to survive. The contract signing ceremony proceeded flawlessly at 10 a.m. with photographers documenting the historic moment when Hartwell Industries secured the largest renewable energy deal in Middle Eastern history. But Richard's attention kept drifting to the cleaning crew. He could see working on lower floors, wondering how he would explain to a 6-year-old that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. As Abdullah prepared to leave for the airport, he handed Richard an envelope sealed with red wax. This contains information about Sophia's inheritance and educational trust fund that Ahmed's father established before his death. It's been waiting for the right moment to be claimed. How much are we talking about? Richard asked, though he suspected the answer would be substantial. Enough to ensure Sophia receives the finest education available anywhere in the world, and that Maria never has to work 2 jobs again. Abdullah smiled. Ahmed's father was one of our most successful oil ministers. His granddaughter will want for nothing. That evening, Richard found himself in the most unusual position of his career, waiting nervously outside a Queens tenement building, holding a manila envelope that contained information capable of transforming 2 lives forever. The contrast between his usual boardroom negotiations and this cramped hallway smelling of cooking spices and old carpet was jarring, yet somehow more real than any business meeting he'd ever attended. When Maria opened the door to their studio apartment, her exhaustion was immediately visible. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands showed the rough calluses of someone who'd spent another 16-hour day cleaning and scrubbing. Behind her, Sophia sat at a tiny kitchen table, carefully working through first-grade homework with the same serious concentration she'd brought to billion-dollar translations. Mr. Hartwell. Maria's voice carried surprise and concern. Is everything all right? Did something happen with the contract? The contract is fine, Mrs. Gonzalez. Better than fine, actually. But I need to speak with you and Sophia about something extraordinary that's happened. Richard's usual confidence faltered as he struggled to find words for a conversation he'd never imagined having. Sophia looked up from her coloring book, her dark eyes bright with curiosity. Did the men in white clothes change their minds about building the sun machines? No, sweetheart, they're very happy about that. But it turns out that one of those men, Mr. Al-Rashid, knew your Papa Ahmed much better than anyone realized. Richard knelt down to Sophia's eye level, his voice gentle but serious. Sophia, how much did your Papa tell you about his family back in Morocco and Saudi Arabia? Maria stiffened, ancient worries suddenly surfacing. Ahmed said his family was traditional, that they might not approve of him marrying someone like me. He said it was better if we made our own way without asking them for help we might not receive. He was protecting you both, Richard said carefully, but perhaps in ways that weren't necessary. Sophia, your papa's uncle is Abdullah al-Rashid, the man you helped me talk to yesterday. You saved a business deal between your own family and mine without knowing it. The silence that followed was profound. Sophia's crayon stopped moving across the paper as she processed this information with the gravity of someone far beyond her 6 years. Maria's face went pale, her hands trembling as she reached for her daughter protectively. "What does this mean?" Maria whispered. Richard opened the envelope Abdullah had given him, spreading documents across their tiny table. "It means Sophia has a trust fund that her grandfather established before he died. It means she's entitled to the finest education money can provide. It means you'll never have to work 2 jobs again, Maria." Sophia studied the papers with the same intensity she'd brought to the Arabic translations, though most of the legal terminology was beyond even her remarkable vocabulary. "Does this mean we have to move away from here? Will I still see you sometimes, Mr. Hartwell?" The question caught Richard off guard, revealing something he hadn't fully acknowledged to himself. In less than 24 hours, this extraordinary child had become more important to him than any business deal, more precious than any profit margin. "That depends on what you and your mother decide," he said honestly. "But I was hoping we might see a lot more of each other, regardless of where you live." Maria's protective instincts warred with the overwhelming relief of financial security. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care what happens to us?" Richard looked at Sophia, then back at Maria, searching for words to explain feelings he was only beginning to understand himself. "Because in one evening, your daughter showed me something I'd forgotten. That the most important things in life aren't contracts or money. They're connections between people who care about each other." A day 3 weeks later, Richard stood in the most exclusive private school in Manhattan, watching Sophia confidently introduce herself to classmates whose parents owned international corporations and government positions. She wore a crisp navy uniform that transformed her from the cleaning lady's daughter into someone who belonged among New York's educational elite. Yet her warm smile and genuine curiosity remained unchanged. The Pemberton Academy had initially been skeptical about accepting a mid-semester transfer student from public school, but Sophia's entrance examinations had shattered every assumption about her academic preparation. She tested at a 10th grade level in languages, 8th grade in mathematics, and displayed cultural awareness that impressed even their most experienced international faculty. "She's remarkable," Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the headmistress, told Richard as they observed Sophia seamlessly switching between English, Spanish, and Arabic while helping other children with their language assignments. "I've never seen a 6-year-old with such natural diplomatic instincts. She's already mediating playground disputes between children who don't share common languages." Richard smiled, feeling a pride that surprised him with its intensity. "She has that gift for bringing people together. I've seen her do it with adults in the most high-pressure situations imaginable." The transformation in Sophia's circumstances had been swift but carefully managed. Abdullah had arranged for the trust fund to be administered through Richard's company, ensuring that Maria maintained full custody while gaining access to resources that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. They'd moved to a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side, close enough to Sophia's school for easy transportation, but far enough from Richard's world to maintain appropriate boundaries. Yet those boundaries were becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Richard found himself looking forward to their weekly dinners with an anticipation that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with Sophia's infectious laughter and Maria's gradual trust in his genuine intentions. "Mr. Hartwell," Sophia called out, running toward him across the playground with her backpack bouncing against her small frame. "Guess what? Mrs. Patterson says I can help teach Arabic to the older students who are learning international business, just like I helped you and Uncle Abdullah. B. The casual way she'd started referring to Abdullah as uncle revealed how naturally Sophia adapted to expanding family connections. Video calls with relatives in Riyadh had become weekly events, with Abdullah's own grandchildren competing to practice their English with their newly discovered American cousin. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Richard said, automatically reaching out to fix her slightly crooked uniform tie. The gesture felt natural now, paternal in a way that both thrilled and terrified him. Maria approached from the parent pickup area, her appearance as transformed as their circumstances. The constant exhaustion had faded from her features, replaced by a confidence that came from security and rest. She'd enrolled in evening college courses, pursuing the education that pregnancy and Ahmed's illness had interrupted years earlier. "How was your day, mija?" Maria asked in Spanish, then switched to English for Richard's benefit. "Did you remember to thank Mrs. Patterson for the extra reading books?" "I thanked her in Arabic, Spanish, and English," Sophia announced proudly. "She said that was probably excessive, but I told her Papa Ahmed taught me that saying thank you in someone's favorite language makes the gratitude more powerful." Richard watched the interaction with growing awareness of how completely these two had changed his understanding of what mattered in life. His penthouse apartment, once a symbol of success, now felt empty and cold compared to the warmth of shared meals and Sophia's excited stories about her school day. The Saudi contract had proceeded flawlessly, with implementation beginning ahead of schedule and under budget. Business magazines were calling it the deal of the decade, crediting Richard's negotiation skills and cultural sensitivity. Only a few people knew that the real credit belonged to a 6-year-old girl who'd seen past language barriers to the human hearts underneath. The crisis that would test everything they'd built together arrived on a grey October morning when Richard least expected it. His ex-wife, Catherine, called from California with news that made his blood run cold. Their 17-year-old son, Marcus, had been arrested for drunk driving and was facing serious charges that could derail his college plans and future prospects. "You need to come to Los Angeles immediately." Catherine's voice carried the same cold efficiency that had characterized their marriage's final years. "Marcus is asking for you, which frankly surprises me considering how you've prioritized work over family for the past 5 years." The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be devastating. Richard had indeed thrown himself into business after the divorce, using work as an escape from the guilt of failing as a husband and father. Now his son needed him, but accepting Catherine's summons would mean abandoning Sophia and Maria when their relationship was still fragile and new. "I'll be there tomorrow," Richard promised, already calculating flight schedules and rearranging meetings. But as he hung up, a deeper worry surfaced. Would Sophia understand why he had to leave suddenly? Would she interpret his absence as another adult abandoning her, like the death that had taken her father? That evening's dinner at their usual restaurant carried an uncomfortable tension as Richard struggled to explain the situation without revealing his own fears about damaged relationships and competing loyalties. "Your son needs you," Maria said simply when he finished explaining. "Family always comes first, Mr. Hartwell. Sophia and I understand this." But Sophia's reaction was more complex. Her dark eyes studied his face with the intensity she usually reserved for important translations, as if trying to decode emotions he was struggling to hide. "Are you worried that if you go help your son, you won't want to come back and see us anymore?" she asked with devastating directness. The question exposed exactly what Richard hadn't been able to articulate. His relationship with Sophia and Maria felt precious but fragile, built on circumstances so extraordinary they seemed almost magical. Would the spell break if he returned to his old life of family crisis and corporate demands? "Sweetheart, I will always want to see you," Richard said, kneeling beside her chair. "But I'm scared that maybe I'm not very good at being the kind of person that people depend on. I wasn't a good enough father to Marcus, and I don't want to disappoint you the same way." Sophia considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important problems. Then she reached into her small purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, smoothing it carefully on the table. "Papa Ahmed wrote this for me before he went to heaven," she said quietly. "Mama reads it to me when I'm scared about things changing. Maybe it will help you too." Richard unfolded the paper to find a short letter in Ahmed's careful handwriting, written in English so Maria could read it aloud. "My precious Sophia, if you are reading this, it means I had to go away before I wanted to. But love doesn't end just because people can't be in the same place anymore. The love I have for you and Mama will keep growing even when I'm not there to show it every day. When you meet other people who want to love you, don't be afraid to let them. Love isn't like money that gets used up. It's like sunshine that makes everything grow stronger. Be brave, my little translator. Help people understand each other, and let them help you too." Richard's vision blurred as he read Ahmed's words, recognizing the wisdom of a man who'd understood what really mattered even as his own life was ending. "Papa knew that sometimes people have to go away to help their families," Sophia said softly. "But he also knew that real love finds ways to stay connected even across big distances." The week Richard spent in Los Angeles dealing with Marcus's legal troubles became an unexpected journey of reconciliation and growth that transformed his understanding of fatherhood. His son, initially sullen and defensive, gradually opened up about feeling abandoned and forgotten during the years following the divorce. "You sent money, Dad, but you never sent yourself," Marcus said during one of their long conversations in the lawyer's waiting room. "I know you were building your business empire, but I needed my father, not financial support." The words were painful but necessary, forcing Richard to confront the ways he'd used work as an escape from the messy complications of human relationships. Yet this time, instead of retreating into professional obligations, he found himself thinking constantly about Sophia's wisdom and the letter from her father that had given him permission to believe in love that transcended physical presence. Daily video calls with Sophia became the bright spot in each difficult day. She would appear on his phone screen in her school uniform, chattering excitedly about her classes while carefully not asking when he was coming home, a sensitivity that revealed her own fears about abandonment despite her brave exterior. "How is your son feeling today?" she would ask with genuine concern that amazed the adults around her. "Is he scared about the judge meeting? When I was scared about starting big school, Mama told me that sometimes when we make mistakes, it's because we need to learn something important about being stronger." Richard shared these conversations with Marcus, who was initially skeptical about his father's relationship with a 6-year-old translator, but gradually became intrigued by Sophia's perspective on complex problems. "She sounds pretty wise for a little kid," Marcus admitted after hearing about Sophia's advice regarding responsibility and consequences. "Maybe I could meet her sometime, if she wouldn't mind having a messed-up older brother figure." The breakthrough came when Marcus's case was resolved with community service and counseling rather than jail time, thanks partly to character letters that Richard had solicited from Abdullah al-Rashid and other business partners who could testify to his commitment to family responsibilities. But the real victory was personal. Marcus asked if he could come to New York for Thanksgiving, specifically requesting to meet Sophia and Maria. "I want to understand what changed you, Dad," he said simply. "You sound different when you talk about them, like you finally figured out what actually matters." The flight back to New York carried a lightness Richard hadn't felt in years. He'd learned to be present for family crisis without sacrificing the new relationships that had become central to his happiness. More importantly, he discovered that love really was like Sophia's father had written, not a limited resource, but a renewable energy that grew stronger when shared generously. Sophia was waiting in the airport arrival area, holding a hand-drawn sign that read, "Welcome home, Mr. Hartwell," in English, Spanish, and Arabic. When she ran into his arms, Richard felt the profound satisfaction of someone who'd finally learned the difference between success and fulfillment. "Did you fix things with your son?" she asked seriously, studying his face for signs of lingering worry. "We're working on it together," Richard replied honestly. "Just like you taught me, when people tell the truth to each other with kind hearts, good things happen." Sophia beamed with the satisfaction of someone whose advice had been proven wise. Papa Ahmed would be proud that his words helped another papa learn how to love better. That evening, as they shared dinner and stories about the week they'd spent apart, Richard realized that his greatest fear, that distance would diminish their connection, had been unfounded. Instead, their relationship had grown stronger through the test of separation and reunion, proving that some bonds transcend geography and circumstance. Christmas morning in Richard's penthouse apartment bore no resemblance to the sterile holiday celebrations of his previous life. The space had been transformed into a warm gathering place where 3 generations and multiple cultures blended seamlessly around a magnificent tree that Sophia had insisted on decorating with ornaments representing everyone's heritage. Marcus had arrived from California 3 days earlier, his initial nervousness about meeting Sophia quickly dissolving into genuine affection for the little sister he'd never expected to have. He'd been amazed by her ability to switch effortlessly between languages, while helping him understand the cultural significance of various decorations that Abdullah had sent from Saudi Arabia. "She's like a tiny United Nations diplomat," Marcus told Richard, as they watched Sophia patiently teaching Maria's elderly mother how to say Merry Christmas in Arabic. "I can't believe a 6-year-old helped you land the biggest deal in your company's history." The morning brought gifts that reflected their expanding family's understanding of what truly mattered. Richard had arranged for a surprise video call with Ahmed's extended family in Morocco, allowing Sophia to practice her Arabic with cousins she'd never met while receiving their blessings for her new life in America. But the most meaningful moment came when Sophia presented Richard with a hand-drawn picture that depicted their first meeting in the boardroom, complete with Arabic text bubbles and a crayon rendering of the moment that had changed everything. "I wanted to remember exactly how we found each other," she explained seriously. "Papa Ahmed always said that the most important stories should be written down so future children can learn from them." Abdullah had flown in from Riyadh specifically for this celebration, bringing news that the renewable energy project was exceeding all expectations and generating interest from governments across the Middle East and North Africa. But more importantly, he'd brought Sophia's formal adoption papers that would make her legally his ward, while allowing her to remain with Maria in New York. "You are now officially my granddaughter," Abdullah told Sophia during the gift-opening ceremony. "But more than that, you are the bridge between our family's past and its future. Your father would be overwhelmed with pride to see how you've honored his memory by bringing people together." The afternoon brought the arrival of Catherine, Richard's ex-wife, who had surprised everyone by accepting his invitation to meet the people who'd become so central to his transformed life. Her initial skepticism melted away as she watched Richard interact with Sophia with a patience and warmth she'd never seen during their marriage. "You've learned something I never could teach you," Catherine told him quietly, as they watched Sophia and Marcus collaborate on a puzzle while chattering in rapid Spanish. How to be present for people instead of always planning the next move. As evening approached and their guests prepared to leave, Sophia made an announcement that surprised everyone. She wanted to give a speech in 3 languages to thank everyone for making their new family possible. Standing on a chair to address the room properly, she spoke first in English, then Spanish, then Arabic, her small voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd learned that language was a bridge rather than a barrier between hearts that wanted to connect. "Papa Ahmed taught me that families aren't just the people we're born with," she concluded, looking directly at Richard with those serious brown eyes that had first seen through his desperation to the person he could become. "Sometimes families are the people who find each other when they most need love and help each other become the best versions of themselves." Richard felt tears on his cheeks as he realized that his search for business success had led him to something infinitely more valuable: a little girl whose wisdom had taught him that the greatest deals weren't measured in dollars, but in the connections that made life worth living. "Thank you, Sophia," he said, lifting her into his arms, "for teaching me that the most important translation isn't between languages, it's between lonely hearts that want to become a family." As snow began falling outside the panoramic windows, Richard looked around at the faces of people who'd become his chosen family and realized that some miracles came disguised as ordinary children with extraordinary gifts for bringing out the best in everyone they met. The $3.9 billion contract had saved his company, but Sofia Gonzalez had saved something far more precious, his understanding of what success really meant.